They don't run for office. They buy the people who do. You see their names on skyscrapers, jets, and yachts. But their real power doesn't come from money alone. It comes from control so quiet most people never notice. Right now, as you watch this, a handful of billionaires are quietly shaping how you think, what you buy, and even who gets your vote. They don't need to appear on TV. They just pull the strings behind it. Here's the shocking part. It's not illegal. In fact, it's genius. But how do they do it? How do billionaires in America steer politics, media, and business without anyone realizing it's happening? In this video, you'll uncover how billionaires use legal loopholes to steer government decisions. The secret way they shape public opinion, not through ads but through information control. And the quiet networks that make it all look natural. By the end, you'll see the invisible system that runs everything, and realize it's not the leaders on stage who hold the power. It's the ones sitting quietly behind the curtain. Let me show you exactly how this happened. Let's start with something simple. Power today doesn't look like power 50 years ago. Back then, power was loud, speeches, rallies, cameras. Now, it's silent foundations, donations, and advisory boards. Most Americans think billionaires make their money in tech, real estate, or finance. But the real secret? Many spend just as much money on influence. Why? Because power protects wealth. Imagine this, you've made $50 billion. You could lose half if one law changes. So what do? You make sure that law never changes. That's why billionaires invest in influence, not stocks. They fund think tanks. These are research groups that write reports and recommend policies. They donate to universities, shaping what's taught to future leaders. They support politicians, sometimes without ever meeting them. And it's all legal. Here's a small twist most people miss. When a billionaire gives money to a nonprofit, it can still push an agenda. It might promote innovation, but the projects it supports often benefit their companies directly. For example, a billionaire who owns oil interests might fund a clean energy foundation. Sounds good, right? But that foundation may support rules that actually slow down clean energy competitors. Its influence is disguised as kindness. Now, why does this matter to you? Because this influence shapes your daily life, from gas prices to news headlines. And yet, it's invisible. But now here's where things get really interesting. Let's start with the easiest doorway, lobbying. Lobbying is when people get paid to talk to lawmakers. Sounds simple. But here's what most don't realize. Lobbying is a $4 billion a year industry in the US. That's more than the US government spends on the CDC. Every major billionaire-backed company, tech, energy, defense, banking hires lobbyists. These aren't random people. They're often former politicians or senior staffers who know every rule, every loophole, every person that matters. So instead of running for office, billionaires hire the people who already know how to shape it. Here's how it works. A company wants a tax break. A lobbyist drafts a bill or amendment. A senator introduces it, often without ever writing it themselves. The company saves billions. All perfectly legal. One insider once said, "Congress doesn't write laws anymore. They edit them." That's influence, invisible but massive. Plot twist. Billionaires don't just lobby politicians. They lobby the public. Ever noticed how suddenly everyone starts talking about one topic, climate change, crypto, AI? Sometimes it's not random. It's a result of well-timed funding, press coverage, and studies pushed by billionaire-backed organizations. And when the public believes something, lawmakers follow. That's how influence moves from the boardroom to your living room, without you ever noticing. But if you think that's crazy, wait until you hear this. Let's talk about the backdoor deals. These don't happen in Congress. They happen at fundraisers, conferences, and private dinners, places no camera can go. Imagine a quiet mansion in D.C. Inside, 10 people dine together, senators, business magnates, maybe a few media executives. One dinner, one conversation can shift billions in government contracts. And guess what? It's all off the record. Here's the trick. Billionaires rarely donate directly. Instead, they create shell foundations, entities that donate for them. These groups can funnel millions into campaigns or research without ever attaching their names. According to reports, some billionaires fund networks of over 100 nonprofits, all connected, all pushing the same agenda. This web makes it almost impossible to trace who's behind what. Example: a citizen movement starts pushing for lower corporate taxes. It looks grassroots, but it's often fueled by a billionaire-funded PR firm. Or think tanks. They publish papers saying, "This new law will help small businesses." But the data comes from studies commissioned by the same donors who profit from the law. See how deep it goes? But it doesn't stop there. Because while most people focus on politicians, the smartest billionaires focus on narratives, the stories people believe. That's where media control comes in. Some billionaires buy entire news outlets. Others invest quietly in streaming platforms, podcasts, or online media companies. They don't always tell them what to say. They just make sure certain stories never get told. Control the story, control the nation. Sources suggest one billionaire-backed media group reaches over 100 million Americans each week. Think about that, one person shaping what an entire country thinks about policy, elections, even morality. And most viewers never know who's paying the bills behind the scenes. This brings us to the most shocking discovery of all. The real influence doesn't come from money. It comes from access. There's a private system, a hidden world, where billionaires and world leaders meet quietly to discuss global agendas. You might have heard of gatherings like the World Economic Forum in Davos. It looks like a conference, but behind closed doors, deals worth trillions are discussed. Defense contracts, trade routes, AI regulations, and while the public debates on social media, decisions are already made in those private rooms. But here's the part that shocks most people. These meetings often shape national policy before the public ever hears about it. Reportedly, several U.S. policies in tech and energy sectors were first discussed years earlier at private forums funded by billionaire-led foundations. It's like a shadow government, not official, not elected, but incredibly powerful. And remember the loop? Lobbyists influence politicians. The media influences the public. Foundations shape education. Together, they form a feedback loop of power that reinforces itself. No one person controls it, but the system keeps the wealthy at the top. It's not evil. It's efficient. But it means ordinary people rarely stand a chance to compete. So what does all this mean for us today? Here's what it means. Real democracy isn't broken. It's just been rented out. Influence now runs on a subscription model. Pay enough and you get access. Stay quiet and you stay invisible. For everyday Americans, this affects everything: wages, healthcare, education, even housing. Policies that seem random are often backed by moneyed interests. For example, when a new law just happens to benefit a certain industry, it's rarely an accident. The short-term impact? Billionaires grow wealth faster than anyone in history. The long-term? Economic power slowly turns into political power. And that's where the danger lies. Because once wealth controls the rules, the game never changes. But here's a thought. It doesn't have to stay this way. Transparency is rising. Digital records, whistleblowers, investigative journalists. All are shining light into dark corners of power. Even some billionaires now talk openly about reform. They understand that too much secrecy destroys trust. And without trust, markets collapse. So while the system seems untouchable, cracks are forming. Still, before we wrap up, there's one final thing you need to know. What if I told you that the richest people in the world don't just buy influence, they buy time? Time is the one thing money can't make, but it can protect. While most people work to survive today, billionaires plan 50 years ahead. They fund think tanks, foundations, and universities not for today, but for the next generation of leaders who will carry their interests forward. It's not about control today. It's about securing tomorrow. That's why influence isn't loud. It's patient. Every headline you read, every independent study, every political trend, somewhere behind it, a billionaire's seed might have been planted decades ago. Power isn't taken. It's purchased one quiet check at a time. And now that you've seen how it works, you can never unsee it. If this opened your eyes. So here's what we learned today. Billionaires don't need to run for office, they fund the people who do. They shape what you believe through education, research, and media. And they do it all in plain sight, using laws designed to protect them. But knowledge is power. Now that you know how influence really works, you can spot it in headlines, in speeches, in every new idea that seems too perfectly timed. If this video opened your eyes, imagine what the next one will reveal. We'll go even deeper into how global elites quietly prepare for world events before they happen. So hit subscribe, join the conversation, and tell me this in the comments. Backhand index pointing right, if you had $1 billion, how would you use it to make change, for good or for power? Because remember, the biggest power move isn't shouting louder. It's whispering in the right ear. What if I told you that the richest people in the world don't just buy influence, they buy time? Time is the one thing money can't make, but it can protect. While most people work to survive today, billionaires plan 50 years ahead. They fund think tanks, foundations, and universities not for today, but for the next generation of leaders who will carry their interests forward. It's not about control today. It's about securing tomorrow. That's why influence isn't loud. It's patient. Every headline you read, every independent study, every political trend, somewhere behind it, a billionaire's seed might have been planted decades ago. Power isn't taken. It's purchased one quiet check at a time. And now that you've seen how it works, you can never unsee it. If this opened your eyes,